My name is Joshua Jones. I am a consultant and a technical trainer for Zoom. I started about 3 years ago. We did not have a consulting organization or a training organization at the time. So voila, here we are 3 years later. It's been fun. We're going to talk about your webinars. I think you all know that. And they decided to call this Achieving Webinar Nirvana. And I used to study Buddhism, so I'm like, okay guys, here come the puns. So becoming one with your webinar process. And this is just a checklist. Kind of just a list of things to think of. Not a very exciting slide. That's not what I was thinking of here today for you guys. Take a picture of it if you want. We'll make sure it gets distributed later. But the first thing you want to start off with is really contemplating the purpose of your webinar. What the heck are you there to do? Why are people coming? Are you prospecting? Are you lead genning? Are you training? Are you educating? What's the purpose of your webinar? There's got to be a purpose. If you don't have a purpose for a webinar, don't host it. Please, there's enough out there. Have that planning meeting, at least a month in advance, I'd say. Give yourself time. I know webinars will come up last minute. I deal with it all the time. Sometimes you've only got a week lead time. But if you can get yourself a month of lead time, really dial in who's going to be there. What's the purpose of them being there? What are they going to speak about? Prep your presenters earlier. Set those milestones, your objectives, for what you're trying to achieve, and make sure it's clear to everybody. If you have everybody on the same page from the beginning, you're gonna have a good time. Start the promotion as well. Again, 1 month lead time seems like a good amount of time. Check those reminders. Maybe that 1 week reminder isn't so useful, but 1 day and 1 hour in advance when we go through scheduling, we'll talk about these things. But start that promotion cycle. There are many avenues that you can use for promoting. Maybe you're sending out calendar invites. Save the date, register here. Maybe you're promoting on social media. We have ways for you to generate multiple different registration links so that you can promote through different channels and track which channels are successful. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. So setting those goals and milestones. When are the presentations completed? One of the biggest headaches we're ever gonna have is when you know your presenter at the very last minute and you don't have their deck ahead of time. You haven't had a chance to go through and make sure it's in the right style guide. So really try to make that part of your objectives. We've got a deadline of 1 week to get this presentation. 1 week in advance, no changes after that point. Now, good luck with that, but that should be the place that you start. Okay, set that expectation early. It'll smooth things out for you throughout the whole process. Make sure those presenters are briefed. Sometimes you get that really overly verbose presenter like me who could just talk about anything, even if he doesn't know what he's talking about, and he might just derail your whole webinar. I've seen it happen. Moderators like, hold on, that's not what we're talking about. So brief those presenters. They may know tons of stuff about everything, but you want them to talk about something specific, I'm sure. So make sure that they're brief, they understand. Have a technical rehearsal within the week or two in advance, even if you just have them pop into a meeting. What you want to do is test their audio, their video, their screen sharing, if needed. You can do that in a meeting. It doesn't have to be in a webinar. Same functionality there. Am I moving around too much, guys? No? No? Okay. Anyway, so having that technical rehearsal, you don't have to run through the whole presentation. The purpose is just to make sure that everybody can connect, everybody's comfortable with the software. Everybody knows where the buttons are that they need to click. And what's nice about Zoom is your buttons are essentially in the same place as their buttons. So you don't have to guess at where they should be clicking. Audio, video, down at the bottom left. Open up the chat. Make sure you're sending to panelists only, please. So that's the process. Develop that process. Add more steps into the process. This is kind of a loose structure. You can certainly customize this to suit your needs, but I think it's a good starting point for just about any event. So here's the good stuff. Discovering scheduling Zen. There are a few things that can be missed in the scheduling process that can really derail you. So we're going to go through just the scheduling process here on a webinar on the website. Hopefully you guys can see that all okay. We are recording everything, by the way. You can catch it up later. So I've already got a webinar scheduled here, but I'm going to start with a new webinar, but I'm going to take it from one of my webinar templates. How many of us out here actually host the same kind of event over and over and over again? Okay, similar topic, same description. The only thing that really changes is the date and time, right? So using a webinar template, oh, my scaling isn't exactly right on the website here. Well, we've got this white button over to the side. I'm going to schedule using this template. So anything I've put into this template, if I click on the title, which includes my general settings, which includes my oh, I see what's going on here. I'm gonna fix it, guys, bear with me. Because I'm just that kind of guy. Sometimes when you plug your computer into a projector, it's like, hey, what's going on? Okay. So everything that's saved within this template, general settings, the invitation settings, including registration questions, email settings, all of this can be set up ahead of time. Branding, even polling questions. I've got a couple polling questions that'll launch at the same time here. All of this can be set up ahead of time, even your Q&A settings with a template. So I'm just going to find my blue button and schedule a webinar with this template. And again, all I really need to do is adjust the date and time. So we'll set this on, let's say, the 13th. We'll go for 2 p.m., doesn't really matter. Adjust the time zone. If your audience is somewhere else, you may want to go ahead and put it in their time zone. It will represent on the registration page. If you're not using registration, don't worry about it. I want to talk to you about recurring webinars. So this is a template. I can just one-off from that template as much as I want. But if you've ever been to one of our public training sessions, you'll notice that, zoom.us/live training, by the way, you'll notice that the drop-down, you can pick various times and dates. And it's not always in a uniform pattern. We can move them around. So I'm going to schedule this as recurring with weekly recurrence. I'm going to check a few days out of the week. We'll do Monday to Wednesday, Saturday. How many occurrences? We'll just go ahead and put in 4 for now. And I'll show you a trick after we get to the next step. When you're requiring registration, and you don't have to require registration, sometimes it's nice just to blast out a link. This is how you join. Super easy, no registration required. If you're using registration in conjunction with a recurring webinar, tell us how people need to register. Just once to attend everything in the series, just once in choosing the one session they want to attend, or they can choose from the list, check multiple down the list. What we do for our training sessions, and I think what most people are doing when they schedule a series, is schedule for the one session that you want to attend. So we'll go with that option. But we've got a few options there. I prefer to default video to off. I'm a total control freak. If I have a panelist join into my session late and they're suddenly on video and they make some noise, now all my attendees know. So if you default that video to off, if you auto join them in with their audio muted, which is best practice, you'll never have that problem. Once they get joined in, you can show them or allow them to turn on their video. So just in case for those late arrivers. So right here I've got third-party audio selected, and I'd never suggest that you use that. It takes the audio outside of Zoom, which makes things harder to record. Makes the audio harder to manage. Now you have your Zoom session that you're managing and your audio line. And this might remind you of like the early days of video conferencing, and we're way past that now. But the reason I've got third-party audio selected is just in case I decide to launch this session and let you join in, there's going to be no audio. If you try to dial this phone number, doo-doo-doo. Okay, so that's the only reason I do that today. Both is your preferred option. Telephone, computer, audio. Let me know if you have any questions. I don't find much point in requiring a webinar password if I'm using registration. If you do require a password, we build it right into the join link. So you might notice, or your attendees might tell you, hey, there's a password, but I didn't get asked for the password because it's built in. The only thing that requiring a password really does is prevent people that randomly may have come across your meeting ID, or webinar ID in this case, from joining. So it prevents random joins. If you're concerned about that, we have better security features. Q&A, we want to make sure it's turned on unless we want to turn it off. There are circumstances where you won't take Q&A. If it's a one-way announcement. In our all-hands meetings, we actually host them in a meeting, but we could do them in a webinar very easily. We like to send in the questions in advance so that people have a chance to prep on them. So if you're doing an all-hands type of webinar, maybe you don't want the Q&A on. Then again, Maybe you want the Q&A to be very social, which we can work with as well. We can record the webinar automatically, and you'll have to forgive me, I just set up this account last night. I'm missing a feature. On-demand webinars. I'd need to turn on a setting. I skipped that yesterday. An on-demand webinar means that your webinar registration URL will be the same link to watch the recording. So it keeps things nice and consistent. If you put that URL on a landing page, you don't even have to change that page at all. I mean, changing a link on a page isn't very difficult, but if your web team isn't into that sort of thing, then using the on-demand webinar option is really key. To do that, though, you have to have registration on. You have to record automatically to the cloud. And that recording will not start until you move from practice mode into start mode. So just above that, we have practice session enabled. Always use it. Never don't use it. Even if you're hosting a webinar by yourself, practice mode allows you to hop in there. Any panelists that are joining you, it's your green room. You're backstage. The curtain's not lifted. In fact, while you're in practice mode, the doors are closed. Your attendees can't come in. We were talking about that a minute ago. The downside to that, you don't know how many people are waiting until you move from practice mode to start mode. We have had suggestions that we need to get better there, but keep in mind, at this point, your attendees are not joined into the webinar. They're not connected to Zoom completely until you move from practice mode to start mode. So get things set up, make sure everybody can be seen and heard. Screen sharing's working. If you're playing back any videos, just give it a test run through, make sure it's working, and then let your audience come in. Once you move from practice mode to start mode, you've got your title slide up. You probably have all webcams off. It'd be ideal. Otherwise, people just have to sit there and smile until you're ready to start. It's like when the camera comes back to the news broadcaster too early, you know? So be careful of that. Turn off the webcams. Make sure everybody's muted. And I typically recommend moving from practice mode to start mode 3 to 5 minutes before you're ready to start your presentation. Maybe 10 minutes, maybe play some music, all up to you. But at least give them a few, 3 to 5 minutes to get joined in. Make sure they're in the right place. See the title slide. Maybe you're making an audio announcement or two. Hey, we're just about to get started. Thanks for joining us for this such and such a session. And then they're already having a good user experience. If you move from practice mode to start mode right as you're starting to talk, and you've got a couple hundred people that are pending join with various internet connections around the world that may join really quick and some may join a little bit slower, they may miss some of your presentation. And it may be a little bit of a rough start. So let them in early. Most people like to arrive to a movie a little bit early. You will always have people that arrive 30 minutes in advance. We're not so worried about those people. They know what they're doing. I don't understand it. They'll just click the link as soon as they see the reminder email come in. I'll be ready. Okay, we're gonna save this webinar. Actually, advanced options. Who's ever had to host a webinar and then ended up on the day of with a voice like mine right now? All scratchy and just like, I really can't do this. I'm sick, I'm sweating bullets. We're not gonna fly if we do this today. But you should have a backup. Somebody that knows the content well enough, or at least knows the platform well enough, that they can turn it on. So that's what the beauty of the alternative host is. Put in an email address. They do need to be a pro account holder. They don't need a webinar license. They need to be a pro account holder on the same account with you. Otherwise, it'll reject. It'll be pretty obvious that you can't add them. And that means they'll automatically be added as a panelist with a special invite that allows them to start the webinar on your behalf. If they click that link before you do, they will start it as the host, but they're using your license. So if they record to the cloud, you still get the cloud recording. Fun stuff. Could save your life. So now that we've got the webinar scheduled, let's go back to talking about recurring webinars. A lot of people miss this. In fact, I missed it for a while when we first released it a couple of years ago. It shows you your recurrence right there, and you can show all occurrences. So we put in 4 occurrences, but maybe this one on the 15th, that one, let's start that one at 12. I'm gonna save the change. This one over here, we wanna reach a different time zone completely. Let's go ahead and start that at 4 p.m. And this one, let's catch them early in the morning. We'll start this one at 10 a.m. And just below that a little bit, I can just add another session ad hoc. This is what we do for our training program. Zoom.us/live training has Zoom.us/live training. That's why we've never met before. There we have, I think it's 6 different events right now. The registration URL never changes. All we're doing is going back and adding more sessions. I don't have to update that. Our web developers love our team because we never have to change that page. Every once in a while, we may need to change the verbiage, rearrange things, but it's pretty rare. It's a very static page, and I can just keep adding another session. Okay, next one is on the 25th. What's that? Does the meeting or webinar ID ever expire? Nope. As long as you keep adding sessions. Now, if we get to October 25th, past 12 a.m., I guess, why not? Reaching India. If we get past that scheduled event and I haven't added another one, it's gone. So it is moved to the past after the last event. Keep in mind if you're scheduling recurring with the same attendees for each session, so people register once to attend all of the sessions, well then you want to have them all start at the same time. You don't want to confuse those people. That's more like a classroom, like a college course, a couple days a week or something. Yeah, any other questions on that? Go for it.
If you don't set this up as a recurring meeting from the start and you then change it to a recurring meeting, can you access it?
Okay, so the question, can you switch a one-off event to a recurring meeting? Yes. Before it starts, yes, and you can add sessions to it. But now that I've set this up as a recurring webinar, sometimes I say meeting, I mean webinar today. If I edit this webinar, it's going to ask me if I want to edit only this one, so the one I'm looking at, which would be top of the list, or do I want to edit all? So need to be careful there. And you'll notice that, oh, we've made a change, never mind. In some cases, if you schedule, for instance, recurring with no fixed time, some of those settings will not be changeable once they're scheduled. But if you schedule as a one-off, like you're asking, and then switch it to recurring, no problem. Any other questions about recurring? I'll repeat the questions for now so you all hear them. Go for it.
Sometimes when I schedule a recurring meeting or webinar, all of the future dates will go out with the email.
Yes, they definitely will.
Is there a way to eliminate that? Because I don't want to think they can go to a future one. I want them to go to this one.
Okay, so that goes back to scheduling with registration. So if I edit the webinar again and edit all webinars and look at the registration setting, it sounds like you might have it selected so that attendees register once to attend all the series. But if you use that second option where they register once, they'll only be notified about the one session that they've registered for. You're talking about reminder emails? Yeah? So yeah, definitely use that second option. Sounds like maybe you're using the first. Yeah. Anything else on that?
Now, as an extra part to that, isn't it possible to go into your site settings and modify the email that comes out, and can you take out the dates of it? Or is that
I wouldn't recommend it because that's gonna, you can go into webinar settings and you can edit every single email that Zoom sends. You can go into what's called free marker. It's kind of like HTML, but a little different. And you can customize all of those communications. But if you pull out something like the date field, then it affects every webinar on the account, not just your user, all of the users. So that customization is an account-wide setting. Use it, take advantage of it, but just be careful that it's ubiquitous for all users. Okay, let's move on a little. We'll do a more formal Q&A session in a bit. As we scroll down, we've got our settings, we've got the webinar ID. That doesn't change. Even if it's recurring, it stays the same for each one. We've got our invitation settings, and this is the next thing I wanted to talk about. I can add duplicates. I can spoof my registration URL. So if we go to the registration page, we can register, everything's fine. But if I add another registration URL, let's say this one's for social media. I'm typing. And then we've got maybe email. And you know what? Maybe we're a little old-fashioned and we have an actual paper newsletter. Now, for that newsletter one, I definitely want to go to something like bit.ly and shorten that URL. Because if you're going to promote a URL in print that people can't just click on, please shorten it. Make it as short as you can. Or talk to your web team. Hey, make a redirect for us to this page. But what we've got now is 3 additional URLs. This first URL, the original one, doesn't have a source tracking to it. So what you'd want to do is actually use the 3 below. So this is the one that we use on social media. Here's the one that we use in that email newsletter or whatever it may be. And here's our print newsletter. And when each of those links gets a hit, you can see how many visits you get to your page and how many actual registrants. Sorry, I'm trying to scale it so you can see better, and it kind of squished that. So you can see registrations from that link and visitors. So how many hits the page gets, how many actually completed the form. So you can tell if your social channel is not kicking up enough dust. You can tell if that newsletter is something you should maybe do away with. Send a postcard. I've seen it all. So you can edit, and if you do edit, it's just changing the name. And being able to track those different sources, your marketing team is going to fall in love with you. Who is doing webinars for their marketing team? Really? Only that many? Gosh, they must be somewhere else right now. It's a good amount of people, though. Marketing has a lot of oversight over webinars in a typical organization. This is where you can add your panelists as well. I'm not going to dig into that. I think most people probably understand panelists, but let me know if you have any questions. We've got email settings. I don't have to mess around here because I pulled this from a template. So if I edit here, it's already got some customization. It's got some text in there that we like to send. We actually put this in on this account through webinar settings, which we were talking about earlier. Affects the whole account. So everybody schedules with the same banner and logo and branding, the same default questions and registration, the same default customization of your emails. Now you can turn registration off within Zoom. You don't have to take registration through the Zoom pages. You don't have to send email communications through Zoom. We have a good amount of integrations, and they're getting better. Just wait for it. And we've also got APIs. And you can totally customize your user's experience. Essentially, they wouldn't know that you're using Zoom until they launch into the session. And even then, we're not saying, hey, this is Zoom that you're using. It's pretty discreet. So again, you don't have to do this all through Zoom, but we've got just about everything you can need. So we've got our banner and logo. Through branding, we can also add speakers. They'll show up at the bottom of the registration page, so you can have a list of up to 3 speakers. I know I've been asked for more. I don't think you really need more. If you have more than 3 speakers, do you need to list them all on the registration page? I've been asked to put in more. I talk to the product team sometimes. They love when I come over. The header text, so you can customize the color a little, put it into your color branding. The post-attendee URL. Zoom is working to have its own built-in survey tool. We don't have one yet. Maybe you noticed. It's kind of a hang-up for some people. What we do is we provide a link to SurveyMonkey. We put it in the chat at the end of our session, and we ask people, please take a moment to take our survey. We're trying to do better. Your feedback is critical to us doing better. Implore them. If you just tag the, in my past life at another product, they had a survey that would pop up just at the close of the session, which seems nice, but then you're just putting it in front of them and not really imploring them. You're not asking them nicely. You're not giving them a reason, really, unless you close with, you're about to see a survey on your screen. I think sharing it through the chat is a little bit better. You can put it in the follow-up email as well. But actually giving them that verbal ask, we're trying to do better. You're helping us with that. Give us your feedback. I think you'll see better turnaround on your surveys. Now, in the future, again, we are working to have some built-in either integration or tool for surveys. Fingers crossed that's going to work just the way you want it. I can't wait to see it. But right now, the post-attendee URL, I wouldn't recommend that for a survey. The reason for that is the post attendee URL actually opens up 5 minutes after you've successfully joined into the webinar. So as you click to join, you get a page open in your browser. It says launching. 5 minutes after you've successfully joined, that page forwards to the post attendee URL. That's why it'll never get caught by a pop-up blocker. It's a forwarding page, but it's technically open there in their browser the whole time they're in the session with you. So maybe not the best place to put your survey. Could work, but then maybe you're getting survey responses before the event's even over. Well, I don't know. So I usually like to use that for a call to action. Here, ours points back to our training page. Again, zoom.us/live training. And then something that's relatively new, which I think is a good thing because we get asked about promoting on social media, is the social media share description. And what that is if somebody shares the registration URL on social sites, they show a little preview of it. And now you can customize the text. And you can even make sure that the right logo that you've uploaded instead of the default Zoom logo is going to show in that field. So if you're actively using social media, don't miss that step. Okay, we'll scroll up. The polling question that I had added, it carried over. Of course, I can add more polling questions. I can add more polling questions while I'm live in session if I need to, but I'd rather have them set up ahead of time. I can adjust my Q&A settings, but I can actually change all of these settings while I'm live in session as well. And we've made some changes here as well. I don't know if you've noticed, but Q&A, typically, you want the questions to come in. You don't want attendees to see each other's questions, right? Does anybody ever want attendees to see each other's questions? Anybody? You can do it. Yay. There's 5 of you. This can be great. It can be really great, especially if your audience isn't too large. Because if I switch this over here, so I'll edit, I'll allow attendees to see all questions. I'll give them permission to upvote so they can like a question, and it moves up the list. So as a presenter or moderator, I'm like, obviously the audience thinks we should talk about this. Doesn't mean we have to, but they know that you're ignoring them at that point because they can see these questions. Now you can also let them add in threaded comments. So your attendees can actually start responding to questions. I would use this in an internal situation, like an all-hands meeting, like a training, education within my organization. Keep in mind your attendees will be able to see each other's names. So if you're prospecting and you're doing this, I don't know. I don't want my attendees to see each other's names. What if one of my competitors jumps in and all of a sudden has at least the first and last name of all of my leads? It's not going to be hard for them to figure out what I'm doing and take my leads. Attendees can comment. If you have a really large audience, that could be totally distracting. All of a sudden, there's a side conversation going on in your Q&A panel, and nobody's listening to your presenter. So keep in mind, you can change these settings while you're live in session. Maybe you want to say, anytime during the presentation, submit your questions. And then once we get to the Q&A session, maybe I want to switch it over. So any new questions come in, now we can upvote them, and now we can have chained comments. So you can change it anytime you want. So getting a little bit social with your Q&A panel, again, my main caution and concern there is the size of your audience. If you've got, like over 100 people, that could get a little too busy and become a distraction. I mentioned Zoom has integrations, APIs. Oop, did I save my changes? I didn't. Okay. Remember to save. Integrations and APIs are available. We can talk more about that if you have specific questions. It's kind of a big can of worms to open. But we have live streaming as well. Anybody use the live streaming yet? What are you using? Facebook, YouTube? Facebook? What do your people think about it?
I love it.
What are your customers that are using it?
I think they love it too.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, so why did you decide to use Facebook?
That's where most of my target audience is on Facebook.
That's where your community is. Exactly. Who else is streaming? What are you using?
YouTube.
Okay.
I'm wondering about the Zoom logo being on the bottom right.
We have a setting for that too, sir. So what's and I'll have to log out of this account and log into my admin account to change that. But through the branding section, you'll need to have a business account with Zoom that's 10 or more licenses. You'll need to have a vanity URL, and then you can dig into branding. And under the meeting section, it affects your webinars as well, you can replace that watermark. Okay, need to have a business account. Need to do it as an admin under the branding section, meetings tab. When you replace it, make sure that the background of your logo is transparent, like a PNG, so it looks like it's just ghosted over. It's not like, you don't want a big block square. You want it to be kind of a transparency. But it will still say in tiny, tiny print, powered by Zoom. No more Zoom logo, though. Any other questions about streaming? Anybody doing any custom streaming to a custom page? Why are you doing custom streaming? That's exactly it. Lots of audiences, different locations. Let's say we've got this manufacturing facility over here where not everybody can make it to a workstation to join into the webinar. So we could just have one station, like a conference room there, join into the webinar, or we could stream it to a page. And that way, let's say that location just has terrible network connectivity. So instead of having 100, 500, 1,000, 3,000 people trying to connect to Zoom and bogging down your network in that location, it's a sensitive issue, they can stream it. Now, the downside to that is they're not actually in the session. Unless you provide an avenue for them to ask questions, comment on Facebook, comment on YouTube. On the live stream, the page you'd set up, it would need to have a chat or Q&A functionality built into it. So they're not really getting the live in-session experience. If you launch a polling question, they can't vote on the poll. So maybe you want to use something like Poll Anywhere, where everybody can hop on their smartphone and respond to your poll. Poll Anywhere, I think I said that right. So reaching a larger audience, careful about bandwidth situations, large number of people in one network location, all good reasons to use custom live streaming. That makes it more like, I guess term in the industry is a webcast. I know, there's nuances between these seemingly inane terms, but you guys get the idea. What's nice about live streaming to Facebook and YouTube and Workplace by Facebook, you don't have to leave it up the whole time. So a lot of us, raise your hand if you're prospecting. You're lead gen. Webinars lead gen, anybody? There's gotta be more than that. No? Okay. So let's say you are using it for lead gen. And so you're discouraged. You don't want to use Facebook. You don't want to use YouTube because you're not capturing their information. You're getting their online profile, if that's accurate for any use. So maybe you just want to launch that stream and keep it open for 10, 15 minutes. For those of you joining us via Facebook or YouTube, however you're joining us, we want you to attend the rest of this session. But you're not going to be able to unless you use this link to register and join us right now. Keep in mind, as long as your webinar is scheduled for automatically approve, people can register and join in anytime. The bottom of the registration page, instead of the register button, if it's a one-off event, we'll just say join webinar in session. If it is recurring, it'll say register, but if they're registering for the one that's open right then, they'll be pulled right into the session. So being able to convert those kind of anonymous online social media attendees to actual leads, I think is a good idea. I hope you agree. Thank you. So those are some things about scheduling. I added a few more items. Panelists, alternative hosts, co-hosts. What's the difference? So we talked about the alternative hosts. They get invited as a panelist, but they have permission to start the session. Otherwise, if you just add them as a normal panelist, they can join in, they can speak, they can show their screen potentially, they can view questions in the Q&A, they can show their webcam. So anybody that is a guest speaker, maybe they're sitting in the background to answer questions. They just need to be a panelist. Alternative host, remember, that's the person who can save your butt. If you're sick, if you have an emergency, if you decide to go skydiving and things don't work out, they can start that, I didn't know how that'd go over. They can start that webinar on your behalf. Now the co-host is somebody that you can promote. Once they're joined into a panelist, you can make them a co-host. And in a webinar, the co-host can do everything except for two things. They cannot edit polls. They can manage them, they can launch polls, but they cannot change them. Only the actual host who's logged into Zoom can do that because you're the one who owns that account, security. So they can't edit polls and they can't end the session. But they can mute and unmute callers, they can launch polls, they can manage other webinar features. If you have a large event, you probably want to have a co-host or two. And they can dig in there, help you out while you're moderating or doing whatever you need to do as the host. So having a team, especially for larger events, using the co-host feature, you can have multiple co-hosts. In fact, technically, I think you can have 99 co-hosts because you can have 99 panelists, but we've all heard the Jay-Z song. Chi is for checklists. I think that was like me at my most witty while I made this. Anyway, Zen. Here's a checklist. Again, if you guys want to take a picture, go ahead. No worries, it's not like my intellectual property or anything. And you can add to this. There are many steps that you may want to add in. 30 minutes before you start, what are you doing? And you could have a checklist for 2 weeks before you start, 1 week before you start. You know, checklist for like organizing the year's webinars. Checklists are good. So 30 minutes prior to the start, you just want to dive into Zoom, get on the website, make sure all the settings for your event, make sure the settings for your account, if you change them from event to event, just make sure they're accurate. Just double check it through the website. I know you can save the appointment to your calendar and just start it right from there, but if you just double check those settings before you go live, you might fix a potential problem. So just double check your settings when you're ready to start the webinar. When I'm working with our clients, we're always on 30 minutes in advance. We don't always need that much time. In fact, it's very nice when that last 15 minutes before we start, we're just sitting there cracking jokes. That's the best. Nobody's stressed out. Everybody's having fun. You've got enough time. Review your session settings. So as soon as you start that session, hop into the participant list. Click that More menu that's at the bottom. Make sure that your settings are right. Same thing for the chat. Your attendees can chat in a webinar, but you can lock it down so that they cannot. Q&A. I told you you can change those settings that we saw on the website. You can change them while you're live in session. So just make sure those settings are accurate. Add your co-hosts, those panelists that have joined you in practice mode. Remember, we're in practice mode here. Attendees can't join in. And just perform ongoing checks. Test that video, whatever you need to do. Make sure everybody's comfortable. 10 minutes before, make sure the content's up. Share the slide. You've already tested the video that you need to play back or whatever it may be. Make sure the slide is up. Check any webcams again. Check your audio as needed. Any final questions? We're about to begin. 5 minutes prior. Oh, do you want me to go back? Here we go. I'm here for you. We can make sure you get this information later too. So 5 minutes before start, like I said, turn off the webcams. Otherwise, you've got that anchor person just sitting there looking pretty, hopefully. Or like the cameras on the conference room and you see people shuffling around and audio's live and you can hear the CEO having a candid conversation with somebody from HR and nobody should be hearing. Nobody. So turn off the webcams, mute the audio. One person should be designated maybe to say, hey, we're about to get started in 5 minutes. Thanks so much for joining in early. If you have any questions, type in a Q&A. And do that maybe once every minute or two. Then when you're ready to go live, provide housekeeping. Give people, level set an expectation. This is what's going to go on today. In that housekeeping, usually when I work with clients, they'll have me do it. It takes me a minute. Welcome, everybody. Good day. I like to say good day. I don't know. Just leave you with that one. It's not good morning. It's not good afternoon. It's not good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you may be in the world. It's just good day. Welcome. We're so happy you've taken time to join us. Here's a little bit about how you can interact with us. We get that spiel out of the way, and then the most crucial part, because usually I'm not taking part in the webinar. I'm sitting backstage. I'm like the Wizard of Oz. So I don't want to talk anymore after that. So I say, in just a moment, you'll hear from our presenters. And they wait for 5 seconds before they start speaking. And that's where I start recording. And I remind them not to start by saying, thanks, Joshua, because that's not a good way to start a webinar. If you ever see a webinar recording out there from years past, and it starts with thanks, Joshua, that's my fault. I forgot to tell them. 0 minutes. So you've provided that housekeeping, you start recording, you begin presentation. Sounds easy, right? That only took me 26 minutes to tell you. Nope, that was 41 minutes. Post-event, have a checklist for that as well. Manage the recording, make sure it gets sent out. Download the reports, host a post-event meeting. So important. Celebrate what went well. We got really good feedback from Joe and Sue and Tom. We didn't get good feedback from Martha and Jim. Why not? So celebrate the successes, but also be critical. What can we do better? Because that's always what we're doing at Zoom. Hopefully you noticed. We're always working on doing things better. I wanted to save more time for questions, but we kind of fed in some questions during. Lay it on me. What you got? Oh, that's tough to decide. I saw you first, sir.
So, I'm sorry, I came in late. I was at one of the other sessions.
Oh, we can bring a microphone down if you want.
That was my question.
Huh?
Audio nightmares. Video, people.
Can we meet outside?
Zoom is great video. What goes wrong with the audio? What should you prepare?
Okay, so the question and really, what goes wrong with audio? How do you prepare? At 4 p.m., I have a meeting session where we're going to talk about hosting large meetings, and I'm going to get into audio a little bit. Here's the rule of thumb. Have a headset. If you want your webinar to be super easy, make sure each of your presenters is just in their own location in front of their laptop with their external webcam at about eye level. So maybe they put a book or two under their laptop, that happens, and they're wearing a headset.
When you say headset, you mean a headset
with a boom microphone. And so a headset with a boom microphone, because if you have an animated speaker like me who's looking left and right, and you can tell when I get close to this lavalier mic, sorry guys. So you can really jack up a lavalier mic if you're animated. So even on a stage, I'd recommend a headset mic if you have somebody that's moving around a lot. If people are seated, like in a panel, couches, lavalier mics work great. So that can scale, huh? I'll talk to you later. We have Logitech here. I think we have Plantronics is here. My personal favorite, because I'm an audio nerd, is still Sennheiser. I think they make really good, comfortable, reasonably priced gear. But Logitech, Plantronics, just those are like the 3 staple names that jump out to me. I'm not saying one of them is any better than the other, but there's one that I like.
One quick follow-up.
Bluetooth
microphones are coming out.
Don't do Bluetooth. Because if your Bluetooth is paired to your cell phone and your cell phone rings, you're no longer on your webinar. And Bluetooth, I don't like wireless headsets for the same reason. Like wireless microphone like this, well, this is what it's meant for. This isn't a cheap piece of equipment. I think it's it's probably gonna run you about $400. You buy yourself a $99 lavalier mic, good luck. A lavalier that plugs in via USB, it sounds romantic. It's not. So yeah, spend the appropriate amount. Using a headset microphone on stage or at your desk is just gonna be the simplest, easiest solution. You never have to dial your phone again. Okay. Sorry, I'm going with the quick hands. You're next.
Is there, just kind of tagging on to that audio piece, we use Zoom webinars in a kind of large production
So you have a live
environment.
audience and a remote
We've
audience.
got soundboard, we've
A
got...
blended event.
Correct. Now what we noticed when we launched, the camera feed is transmitted at a lower bit rate or a lower quality than your content feed. I think it was the content is 320 kilobits a second. The primary camera feed is lower. So when you're running through a soundboard and you're trying to run everything through, say, the camera feed,
So you've
that
got a
audio,
video
that
switch
audio is
going on?
degraded. Yeah, we've got video switch,
Okay.
everything running through. So what we ended up having to do is we had to push anything. We had to push 2 separate audio feeds. We had to run
One to the room and one to
all
the webinar.
contents, if there's any video playback or music playback coming through for like stingers, walking up a presenter.
Okay, you're playing music.
All of that has to come through
So
the
you're
video
hearing the music is getting
share.
punched down, not
Correct.
the talking.
Yeah,
per
you'll
se,
hear
right?
you'll hear the waving. Is there any increase that they plan on improving the camera feed audio? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I know what you mean. So I don't know of any plans to change that, but there are some best practices that you can use to make sure that, first I would recommend maybe, the reason this gets sticky, and it's 6 of one, half a dozen of the other, is because every setup is a little different. So I'd want to talk a little bit more, and I'd be happy to. But in some cases, you may want to, instead of playing the video from the video switch, maybe you just want to play it through the screen sharing. I can show a video through Zoom screen sharing, and the audio quality is going to sound a lot better than if it's coming through that, what's supposed to be a voice input. So you're playing
That's exactly
music,
what we've
what's
done.
supposed to be a voice input. Zoom is like, I'm ready for voice. And all of a sudden you got, and it's just going to go.
And that's exactly what we've done to counteract that. So I was just
Yeah,
curious if
and
there was any changes coming.
You know what? Now you can actually play audio without sharing screen. So if you click to share your screen and click the advanced tab, you can play audio without starting your screen sharing. So if you're just showing your video feed, play the tune, that may be a decent workaround. I'll bring it up and see if we can talk some more about it. I'll be outside. Let me get one more question. You had one?
Just wondering if any of the webinar features are coming to standard meetings, things like Q&A and templates.
Then who would buy webinars?
I tend
So you
not,
want things like templates?
Yeah, I tend not to use webinars because I do like the interactivity. I like everyone to be able to turn their cameras on.
Well, I hope I see you at 4 o'clock then.
Yeah, I even do breakout rooms and stuff, even if it's a large group. So,
Yeah, that needs
so I
to be
find
the
that
meeting.
more kind of engaging than sort of more informational webinar if I'm kind of teaching something more than promoting something. So
Yeah, so on the meeting platform, you have what's called a personal meeting ID, so you could always set up a bunch of polling questions in that, but you can also schedule as many recurring meetings as you want. Now, technically, a recurring meeting, you would set it so that it has no built-in date and time to it, so then you can use it whenever you want. And that could act as a template for you. You just got to make sure that you keep using it. If you let it sit idle for an entire year without using it, it's gone. But that's a long time.
you think we might see Q&A as well on meetings?
You know, it's like when people ask, are we going to get breakout rooms and webinars? I think so at some point, but they're different environments, and I don't know if they always cross over well, and I don't know if, putting Q&A into a meeting environment, what you can do in meetings is make sure that your attendees can only send chats to the host so that attendees don't see each other's comments. Maybe that helps.
Yeah.
You don't really get to respond in line to the question, but you can still respond like via text, but you can still respond to that person. It's just not as organized as the Q&A panel would be.
Yeah, okay. Thanks very much.
I want to keep talking to you folks. I'm going to be out in the hallway, but we got to get out of here so the next group can come in. Thank you so much for your time. Have a fun time.